The kitchen smelled of roasted turkey and sage, the kind of warmth that should have wrapped me in comfort. Instead, it was pierced by words I was never meant to hear. I had stepped into the doorway quietly, holding a tray of rolls, when Connor's voice cut through the clatter of dishes. "My mother isn't worth a penny," he whispered, and then he laughed. Jenna chuckled along, the sound sharp as glass. I froze. Rolls balanced against my hip, my ears hot, my son's voice, the same one I once soothed in midnight fevers, now dismissed me as if I were nothing more than a misplaced bill. The hurt landed heavy, but years of practice taught me how to cover the wound. I moved forward, placing the tray on the counter with steady hands, though inside my stomach twisted. "Where do you want these?" I asked, tone light, as though nothing had happened. Jenna turned quickly, too quickly, cheeks flushed as she smoothed her apron. Connor reached for the carving knife, avoiding my eyes. I busied myself with setting out silverware, each fork and spoon aligned in quiet rhythm. I let their conversation drift into talk of wine glasses and centerpieces, as if I hadn't heard my own worth reduced to a joke. My face carried a calm that belied the storm gathering beneath it. The table would soon be filled with relatives, laughter rising over cranberry sauce and pie. I would take my seat as if nothing were amiss, but the sentence in the kitchen had already carved its place inside me. Later, when the house grew quiet again, I would reach for the lockbox I hadn't opened in years. That night, after the laughter and the clinking of wine glasses had faded into memory, I drove back to my own house in Tacoma. The rain tapped steady against the windshield, as if the city itself understood the weight pressing on my chest. Inside, I slipped off my shoes, set down my coat, and went straight to the closet where I kept the old fireproof lockbox. It had followed me through every move, every decade, carrying the paper trail of a life spent keeping things afloat. The metal was cool beneath my fingers as I turned the key. Inside lay envelopes, check stubs, and neatly folded statements. I began to sort through them with the same precision I once brought to my shifts at the hospital. Transfer receipts stretched back 10 years' monthly deposits I had made into Connor's account when his hours were cut at work. Then, when Jenna's new venture needed just a boost, there were HOA checks I had quietly written, so their dues stayed current. Even when I knew my own roof needed repair, near the bottom was the thick manila envelope I hadn't touched in years. I unfolded the quitclaim deed, my name written there in black and white. My revocable trust had co-funded the purchase of Connor's house, and Pierce County's records confirmed it. The closing agent had insisted my trust be listed for speed, and at the time, I thought nothing of it. To Connor, it was as though the paperwork had vanished. To me, it was proof that his laughter in that kitchen wasn't the final word. I stacked the papers neatly, my hands steady now, my breath slow and even. He believed I was invisible, but the receipts told another story, and before long, I would follow where they led, straight into the hours when sleep would not come and numbers would not lie. The stack of papers in my lap drew me back through time. Each line item, another mile on a road I had walked without fanfare. I remembered the years when Tacoma General called me almost nightly, asking if I could stay over for one more shift. I said yes more often than I should have, my body aching as the fluorescent lights blurred and the hours ran together. Those extra paychecks didn't go to vacations or comforts. They went to Connor's books, his rent when he was first starting at Tacoma Community College, the tuition bill that threatened to derail him before he began. There was the summer I had promised myself a trip down the coast, a week of rest with ocean air, but instead, I watched the money vanish into the bursar's office. I told friends I simply preferred staying home, but the truth was simpler. I couldn't stomach the thought of Connor sitting in a registrar's office. Told he couldn't continue without payment. Later came the car loan. He was barely 20, eager to prove himself. But his credit was too thin. I sat across from him in the bank, pen in hand, co-signing without hesitation. I watched the relief on his face and convinced myself that was worth the risk. For years, I accepted these moments as the natural course of motherhood, stepping in quietly, holding the net while he climbed higher. I never complained aloud. Yet silence has a way of shaping children's ears. Connor grew used to the cushion, expecting it without gratitude. When Jenna arrived, she slipped into that rhythm easily, as though my support was a line item in their household budget. I am not without fault. I see now how my refusal to set limits, born of fear that boundaries might distance us, built the very entitlement that now cuts me. I thought love meant absorbing every burden, every shortfall, without ever asking for recognition. The lockbox sat open beside me. Receipts spread like a testimony. My stomach tightened as I wondered what all those skipped meals and sleepless nights had really purchased. And as I reached for another folder, I knew the truth would only grow sharper in the hours to come. Sleep would not come. The house was dark and still, but my mind ticked louder than the clock on the wall. I pulled my laptop onto the dining room table and opened a fresh spreadsheet, the screen casting a pale glow across the papers I had already sorted. The numbers came easily. I had lived them long enough. Line by line, I entered the transfers 500 here, 1,000 there, repeated month after month until the total reached $4,800. I added the $6,000 wire marked temporary to Jenna's business account, money that had never found its way back. Then the checks for HOA dues and utilities expenses I had covered without a word rounded out the tally. The final figure sat at the bottom of the column like a stone, heavy and undeniable. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. For years, I had told myself these sacrifices were gestures of love, temporary measures until Connor and Jenna found their footing. But in the quiet glow of that spreadsheet, they looked less like love and more like a ledger of expectation. One-sided and unpaid. The ping of a new email drew my eyes. It was from Lydia Kwan, the attorney I had reached out to earlier in the week. Her message was precise, stripped of sentiment. She had pulled the Pierce County records. My revocable trust was listed as holding a 50% recorded interest in Connor's property. Even more striking was a clause buried in the documents, transfer on death. If Connor defaulted or fraud was proven, his share reverted to my trust. I read the lines twice, 3 times, the words clicking into place. Connor could not refinance, could not sell without my signature. The laughter in his kitchen suddenly felt brittle, built on the assumption that I had nothing to stand on, but the record said otherwise. I saved the spreadsheet, printed copies of the deed and clause, and slid them into a folder. My hands were steady, though my pulse quickened. The silence of my years had written me into their foundation. Now it was that same silence, backed by paper and ink, that would decide what came next. I closed the laptop and left the folder on the table, ready for the morning when I would seek Lydia's counsel in person. By morning, the fog over Commencement Bay clung low, matching the heaviness in my chest. I carried the folder into downtown Tacoma, where Lydia Kwan's office overlooked Pacific Avenue. She greeted me with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to cutting through excuses. I laid out the spreadsheet, the deed, and the clause I had printed. She scanned them without interruption, the only sound the soft rustle of paper. When she finally looked up, her expression was firm. "You've been more than generous," she said. "But generosity doesn't include being defrauded. Here's what we do." She outlined each step with the precision of a surgeon. First, I would file an affidavit of non-consent for any loans opened in my name. It wouldn't erase what had already been done, but it would establish a legal record that I had not agreed. Next, she directed me to place fraud alerts with Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, and added Wall to keep new accounts from appearing under my Social Security number. Then came the measure that made my breath catch. She advised recording a memorandum of interest against Connor's house. That blocks any refinance or sale without your knowledge, she explained. It's a notice to the world that your trust has rights in this property. I nodded, absorbing the gravity of it all, and then Lydia leaned forward, tapping a single line on the deed copy. This transfer on death clause is unusual, but enforceable. If your son defaults, or if fraud is proven, his portion doesn't go to probate. It comes straight to your trust. The words settled like iron. I had spent decades cushioning him, but here was a safeguard I hadn't even realized was mine. Lydia closed the folder, sliding it back across the desk. The choice is yours. You can let them keep believing you're powerless, or you can show them the papers. I tucked the envelope under my arm as I left her office, the autumn air biting sharper than before. That night, I unlocked my storage unit and began to gather what was mine beyond dispute, preparing for the moment when silence would no longer be my shield. I waited until Connor and Jenna were out for the evening before I drove back to their house. The garage opener still worked. No one had bothered to change the code. Inside, I walked slowly, scanning each room for the things that were mine by right. Not sentiment. The oak dresser my mother had passed down to me still stood in the guest room, polished but forgotten. I photographed it from every angle. Receipts tucked in my folder to prove its purchase long before Connor ever married. The set of tools I had bought when he first moved in. Sockets, wrenches, drills lay scattered in the garage. I gathered them piece by piece, documenting each with my phone before loading them into the back of my car. On a small desk in the den sat the server I had once given him, the backup where I stored scans of deeds, checks, and bank statements. I powered it down carefully and carried it out, my hands steady. Every item went into my storage unit across town, locked beneath a new padlock. Each photograph uploaded and time-stamped. Back home, I spread out 3 manila folders across my table. One held the county deeds and trust papers. The second contained my spreadsheet of transfers, checks, and stubs. The third carried the evidence of fraud, including the affidavit Lydia had helped me draft. Together, they formed a story no one could dismiss. I picked up the phone, my voice calm as I called Lydia. Then Mr. Alvarez from next door, and finally, my cousin Ruth in Gig Harbor. Each agreed to join me for Thanksgiving dinner at Connor's. I hung up, slid the folders back into the envelope, and set them where I could see them. The table was set, but not for a holiday feast. Thanksgiving arrived with the scent of roasting turkey drifting out to the porch, the kind of smell that normally softened a family's edges. Relatives crowded Connor's house, cousins from Lakewood, an aunt from Puyallup, and a few neighbors who drifted in with pie tins and wine bottles. The living room buzzed with conversation, everyone balancing plates and laughter. Connor moved among them with easy charm, Jenna at his side, both basking in the glow of their carefully staged gathering. I watched from the edge, letting the rhythm of voices carry me until Connor, knife in hand, raised his voice above the chatter. "Next year," he said, pride swelling, "we'll have this place fully refinanced. Kitchen redone, maybe even a pool out back. It's all lined up." The room hummed with approval, a few relatives clapping his back. That was my cue. I stepped forward, envelope in hand, and laid 3 thick folders on the kitchen island, the sound cutting clean through the noise. The chatter died. Faces turned toward me, puzzled, waiting. These need to be seen before we carve anything, I said evenly. Connor frowned. Mom. Not now, but Lydia, standing quietly near the doorway, nodded once. I opened folder A, sliding out certified copies from the Pierce County auditor. This house isn't only yours. My trust holds 50% interest, and here is the transfer on death clause. Gasps rose from the cousins leaning in to read. Folder B came next, my ledger of transfers, checks, and receipts. Over $40,000 in support, plus $6,000 wired to Jenna's business. None of it repaid. Connor's laugh was sharp, brittle. So you kept receipts. That's petty. Folder C shut him up. Screenshots of accounts in my name, IP addresses matching his own home. Lydia's voice carried across the room. Identity theft and fraud are not clerical errors. They are prosecutable. Jenna's face drained of color. It must be a mistake. Some bank error. She stammered. I didn't raise my voice. No mistake. These are the facts. I looked at Connor, then at Jenna. My terms are simple repayment on a schedule we sign in ink, a written apology, and immediate removal of my name from any loans you've tied me to. Otherwise, I proceed with legal remedies. Quiet title, fraud charges, whatever it takes. The silence stretched, broken only by the scrape of a chair as Ruth shifted closer to me. Mr. Alvarez cleared his throat, murmuring, "She's right." The room swayed toward me, whispers stirring. Connor's cheeks burned red, his jaw tight. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Jenna touched his arm, her own voice trembling. Maybe we should listen. I folded my hands, steady and unflinching, around me. The relatives' murmurs grew louder, not in my condemnation, but in recognition. The weight I had carried alone now shifted into the open, undeniable. The turkey cooled on the counter, forgotten. In its place, truth sat heavy on the island. Spread across 3 folders no one could laugh away. I gathered the envelopes, slid them back into the case, and left them there in plain view, a quiet anchor. The feast went on, but nothing tasted the same after that. And as dusk settled outside, I knew the week ahead would bring consequences none of them could avoid. The week after Thanksgiving unfolded like a slow unraveling. By Monday, Connor's lender had flagged his refinance application. The memorandum Lydia filed was now attached to the property, and without my consent, no deal could move forward. He tried to act casual in the family group chat, sending out photos of leftovers, but I noticed the tone short, clipped, more defensive than cheerful. On Wednesday, word reached me through Ruth that Jenna's lease for her studio had been voided. The landlord had been contacted after my affidavit of non-consent circulated to credit agencies, and her application, tied to my name, was rejected. I hadn't lifted a hand to make that happen. The system had done it for me. Quiet steps, properly documented, were already speaking louder than any argument I could have staged at the table. The phone rang Thursday night close to midnight. I saw Connor's number and let it buzz once before answering. His voice was low, heavy with something that sounded almost like fear. "I thought you'd always be there," he said. I closed my eyes, breathing in the silence between us. "I am," I answered, "as your mother, not as your collateral." For a long while, neither of us spoke. I let the words settle, because they were the most honest I had ever given him. The line crackled with his breath, as though he wanted to argue but couldn't find the ground to stand on. I hung up gently. No slam, no parting shot. There was nothing to prove. My strength wasn't in shouting or humiliating him. It was in letting the paper trail and the boundaries I had finally drawn speak for themselves. By the weekend, I felt lighter. The storm I once feared had already broken, and I was still standing. The real work would be in making sure those lines held firm when the time came to put ink to paper. The mediation took place in Lydia's office. a neutral space with tall windows overlooking the quiet rhythm of Pacific Avenue. Connor and Jenna arrived together, shoulders tight. Their words clipped as they checked in with the receptionist. I sat already at the conference table with Lydia beside me, folders arranged in neat order. Lydia began by setting the ground rules: no interruptions, everything documented, the outcome binding once signed. She opened with the facts: my trust's recorded interest, the fraudulent accounts, the transfers that could be traced. Connor leaned back, arms crossed, but he didn't argue. The weight of the evidence had already spoken louder than he could. The discussion turned to settlement. Lydia laid out the terms we had agreed upon. A repayment plan stretched over 5 years. Modest interest added to reflect time lost. And my trust's interest in the property retained until the balance was cleared. In addition, I would be removed as guarantor from the contractor loan within 90 days, or legal action would follow. Jenna spoke first, her voice low but steady. She admitted that her own debts, ones she had hidden even from Connor, had pushed her to nudge him toward using my name. She didn't excuse it. She acknowledged it for what it was. "I thought we could catch up before it caught us," she said, eyes fixed on the table. I listened, and though part of me softened, I did not bend. "I accept your apology," I told her, "but I won't be funding your safety net again." Connor nodded, perhaps relieved the words had been spoken aloud. He signed first, his pen scratching across the page. Then Jenna, finally, I added my name, not as rescuer, but as equal party. When we left the building, the air outside smelled of salt and steel from the port. For the first time in years, I felt the boundaries around me written not just in emotion, but in ink. Lines no one could cross without consequence. The final stage of this chapter of my life was already waiting beyond the signature. 6 months passed, and the house felt different. Quieter, lighter. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I walked to Tacoma Community House with a stack of lesson plans under my arm. I taught women barely out of their teens, mothers starting over, and retirees who had never balanced a budget on their own. We went over credit scores, how to read loan terms, the value of a clean ledger. Each session reminded me of the years I had stumbled in silence, wishing someone had sat across from me with the same clarity. On weekends, I tended the flower beds at Wright Park, knees damp from soil, hands smelling of rosemary and earth. The hellebores I planted in spring bloomed pale against the shade, a quiet promise that resilience didn't always need to announce itself. Connor called once a month. The conversations were brief but steady, no longer laced with demands. He told me about small repairs he managed himself, how they were learning to stretch their dollars. Jenna sent photos of a modest craft booth she had opened at the farmer's market. No frills, but hers. They were learning to live within the lines they had once tried to cross. I felt no triumph, no sting of revenge. What settled inside me was firmer than that peace shaped by boundaries I should have drawn long ago. It wasn't silence that protected me, it was clarity. I stood one evening at my window, watching the street lamps flicker on, the ledger of my life balanced in ways it had never been before. I whispered it to myself as if signing off on the final page. I was not worth a penny to those who needed me silent. I was worth the balance sheet to those who read.